Okay, so this week we're going to continue our conversation on the topic of texture painting over in Photoshop. Now, our little lab exercise today was intentionally designed just to kind of dust off the cobwebs, if you will, continue to familiarize ourselves with the process of taking geometry, working with the UVs, and then sending all that stuff over into Photoshop so we can paint on top of it. Now, I have another little one that we should do here, and this is going to be a cool, fun one that I want you guys to focus on for the remainder of your lab time this week. It's going to be this cool little sci-fi panel. The more that we do this, the more comfortable in this process that we're going to be. In every sense, what we're trying to establish here is some muscle memory, okay? Because it is kind of a weird process that we have to go through, especially when working with UV maps. That's the biggest challenge that all CG artists have to work with, is in this kind of amorphous, weird thing of UV maps. Understanding a sculpture is one thing, but understanding a flattened version of that sculpture is something completely different. And for a lot of folks, it just takes some time before we really begin to feel comfortable working with inside this system. Okay, so let's jump in and start looking at some enhancements, some techniques that we can use over in Photoshop to make our models and to make, most importantly, our textures just a little bit more believable. Okay, now this is in every sense going to be focusing on the art of texture painting, not so much a lot of the individual techniques, although we'll go over a lot of that in the future. The good and the bad thing about working inside of Photoshop is that there are a bazillion ways to get to this end result. So if you know another way, if I don't want to say a better way or a worse way, just a way, something that clicks for your brain to get you to that end result, I say do it, man. Okay, there is no wrong way of painting. There's just your way of painting. Okay. Now, when I like to work inside of Photoshop, I always try to, imagine and place myself inside of the mind frame of the person that actually built this thing. Okay, so here's our little sci-fi panel. This is going to be the focus of our lab this week. And one of the things that I like to do from time to time, believe it or not, is just turn off the wireframes. Okay. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the process of deactivating the visibility of your wireframes on the actual mesh itself, it's a viewport property. So if you go over and hit the O key, you can find this option under the Active Meshes tab of your viewport property, and specifically, it's Wireframe Overlay, that right there. Colored is what we're used to seeing, and then, of course, none is with it off. Okay? And believe it or not, this really makes a big impact on our ability to consume and understand what this piece looks like. I think far too often we get confused, or maybe the visualization of our wireframes take us into one place that's not real representative of what this thing actually is. So here's the sculpture. This is what we're going to be painting this week. In every sense, this is just a wall panel. One panel out of hundreds that would, perhaps go on the inside of some sort of science fiction-y spaceship. If you look at some of the details that you can see in here, of course, we got these really cool little brackets that hold, this outside bit onto this frame. We have a very prominent frame out here, which is recessed, and we have this little inset, which is pretty neat. The brackets have a little bolt on it, and that all leads to this center section in here. Now, as we begin this texture painting process, I think it's a really important idea to project what the conclusion of your texture is going to look like before we even begin. Start imagining what this is going to look like. What kind of details do you want in there? What's this thing made out of? Is it wood? Is it metal? Is it ceramic? Is it made of concrete? Start thinking about that information now. In addition, what other type of human elements can we infuse in here to kind of bring some additional texture detail that will help establish the realism of this object? Okay, like paint. That'd be a cool thing. Maybe certain parts of this are painted metal, and the weathering of this object has chipped away the corners and what have you. The more we understand and can imagine what this texture is going to look like before we start, believe it or not, it's easier for us to paint the texture. Here's an unpopular idea, but it's kind of the truth. This is going to be a whole lot harder if you don't have an idea of what this thing is going to look like before you start painting. Okay, so be inspired. Look at reference. Okay, do some image research on the good old Google and start getting a really solid understanding of what this thing could look like. The unfortunate part about image creation is that Photoshop is not going to help you. Okay, having access to a great tool like Photoshop doesn't instantly turn you into a painter, okay? You have to come to this conversation, this party, with a vision for this texture in your mind before you even start painting, okay? So do some research. Start gathering ideas in the foreground of your mind before you send this thing over into Photoshop and begin your work. Okay, now for me, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just kind of block out some ideas here real fast. And I'm just going to go through this pretty quickly just to kind of wrap my brain around a couple things here. And believe it or not, I'm just going to simply color code some stuff. Okay, now this is just purely for my ideation, okay, to understand how all these things are going to work together, and probably most importantly, how we can create a consistent experience across the entire texture itself, okay? Because it's important that some elements pop out and separate from the others, okay? And maybe there's some common paint jobs between these different elements, okay? Now, I think for me, what I want to have, and I'm going to turn on my wireframes again real fast just to make the selection of this a little bit easier. I think what I'm going to do is that I'm going to have the frame here be one color. There we go. I'm just going to put this in a temporary throwaway material called 1. Okay? So I want that to be its own material, or its own appearance. Okay? This in here is going to be its own thing. The only reason I'm doing this is so that we can go in and just kind of have a game plan before we get started, okay? Photoshop is not going to pull any punches. It's not going to help you along the way. There we go. So that's going to be a different one. We'll just put that in a new material called 2. Let's start assigning these things some pretty radical color values. I always use really extreme colors just so I can very quickly understand what's going to be visually connected to each other. It's not going to be green. That's not what I'm going for, okay? Let's choose another really radical color. That's not so radical. There we go. All right? So the brackets all have to be their own color. Now, maybe the brackets... Yeah, I definitely don't want to have the brackets be the same color as the object that they're sitting on. However, they can't be the same color as the frame, because I want the frame and then this interior bit to be the exact same painted color. So I need a third material in here, a third color for my brackets. Let's just kind of put that over in blue. Okay. Now I know I want all of the bolts to be a bolt-like color. Maybe like a dark, 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 dark gray. This one I'll actually go in and choose a lovely shade of steel. Why not? Okay, start visualizing what that looks like. Yeah, so this is going to be the same color as the outside. It's going to go into here. Then we got this cool little pattern. Maybe this is a rehash. Let's do this. Yeah, let's start having some fun here with this. Maybe this is that exact same nickel color that we had for the bolts, okay? The whole purpose here is just to start planning it out a little bit. Perhaps all of this jazz in here is that same green, but once we get into this loop and this loop, I don't know, maybe we have a different color, okay, or something else. Maybe it could be a real fun... Go something else. And then let's see. This just screams to be maybe perhaps the same color as that should be green, perhaps all the way in there. Yeah, that could be fun. And then last but not least, this row in here. Oops, the wrong key, excuse me. L for loop, shift up arrow to expand my selection. Let's put that in there. Then I want to make these channels that same nickel color that we had earlier. I believe that was 4, yeah. So there's the battle plan, okay? That's it. Now, what I've done here, I've just tried to localize some of my polygons just to kind of make visual connections between them and start to, at the very least, pretend and paint this thing in my mind's eye. It's not going to be green. It's not going to be red. These are just kind of placeholder colors to very quickly help me define a visual relationship between a lot of these pieces. But at the very least, I have a plan now, right? I can start making some meaningful connections between all of these elements over in Photoshop. Okay. All right. Okie dokie day. So what's next? Anyone want to kind of imagine what's next here? How do I get this thing out of Modo back in over to Photoshop? Yeah, you got it. So let's make sure that everything is selected. So wall tile is selected. Yep, my UV maps there are selected. Yep, that's looking pretty good. Excuse me. And now let's start exporting out all this geometry, all of our UVs to an EPS and start having some fun. Okay. Now, going forward, let's be good practitioners, because when we're working on these large texture sets, we need to collect a whole series of assets. Now, if you look back at your experience over the last 2 weeks making some textures, you've downloaded a tremendous amount of content from textures.com or found it on the web, right? You're starting to create this collection of assets that are now influencing what you're able to create over in Photoshop, right? And specifically, the actual texture itself, okay? So here's what I would suggest that you do going forward. Let's be good stewards of our scenes and create an organized network, an organized system, if you will, that will allow you to edit your texture quite easily. So I'm going to put this in a folder called Sci-Fi Panel. Okay. And specifically, this is going to be the textures folder. As one might imagine, everything for our entire textures set is going to go in this textures folder. And now, here's something that I do. I always have a subfolder inside of my texture hierarchy called assets. For me, an asset is a raw material, something that we're going to use to help build and generate a more complex texture set at the end of the day. Okay, so it's a good organizational practice to get into. When you're working with a lot of different materials, it's nice to have everything in one little container. In case you need to go back in and reuse something or build it again, it's right here ready for you. So this is going to be Sci-Fi Panel. And specifically, these are the UVs. The UV maps are an asset of a much larger network. Okay? Go. 2048, that's going to be a good rock and roll texture. And now let's jump over into Photoshop and start building what will eventually be the final texture itself. So let me open up that EPS file. Sci-Fi Panel, Textures, Assets. Let's rasterize it into the correct resolution. 2048 by 2048. There we go. And before I get any further, I'm going to do a file save as. Okay. Now, the raw Photoshop texture that we create, is this going to be an asset? The map that's actually placed and wrapped back on the model in Modo, is that an asset? No. So take this file out of that assets folder. This is a root texture file, okay? So it's not an asset or something we build the texture with. It is the texture. So I'm going to put it inside of my textures folder. Let's give it a good name. So I always put texture, or TEX for texture. So I know just by looking at the file name here, the role of this file inside of the larger system I'm working with. And specifically, this is the diffuse texture, the color texture, if you will. And then this is version 1. I almost always put a version number in there. That's a good practice to get into. Okay? All right. Yes, I want to maximize the compatibility, so hit OK. And we're off to the races. Okay? Now we're in paint mode, right? We've created the network. Everything's ready to rock and roll. Let's start going in and start making some meaningful connections between each one of the elements inside of our scene. Okay? All right, so we have some jobs in here that we need to do. When we were working with the blacksmith shop side, believe it or not, you can go in and stroke it out a little bit. Looks pretty good. We were doing this earlier, looking good. Now, before I get too much further into it, it'd be really, really helpful for me to go in and start making some really great connections, okay, between the colors or the ideas that we established earlier with that kind of texture layout, that color layout that I did in Modo, and what we're working with here in Modo. or Photoshop, excuse me. So this is what I'm going to do, and I really like this idea. This is a fun idea, okay? What I'm going to do is that I'm going to choose to go in and try to recreate this object from a textual standpoint as if I'm the actual craftsperson making this object itself. So in my mind, this is a metal panel. A lot of things in our world, especially science fiction, are kind of metal. So we need to go out and find a good metal texture. That's going to act as the foundation, the base. Because if this was being forged in the science fiction world, it'd be metal, and then maybe certain parts of it were painted on top, and then other parts had like decals and logos infused on the top of it, and then of course the environment's going to begin to influence all that. So we're going to need to chip it away a little bit and add some weathering effects into the final texture to get a more accurate reproduction of what we're after. So let's go in and start that process. I'm going to work from the background all the way to the foreground. The background being the raw element, okay, that this object was created with, and the foreground being the human and the weathering effects that are front-facing inside the texture. So let's return to our great asset in the sky called textures.com and find us a good texture that we can use for our base. Okay, textures.com. All right. So I'm going to go into the metal category, and specifically, let's do bare, because I like to start with a nice base. Now, bare doesn't mean untouched by weathering effects. If you look very carefully, a lot of these images in here have some really great weathering effects and surface detail already on them. So now we're shopping here. We're looking for a good one. This one sticks out almost immediately in my mind. I love these little dark and gray and green bits all over the texture itself. Whenever I've worked with photographic textures, I always look for character. Okay, I don't want it to be kind of a uniform color. I want to use these images to their full capacity, right? Having a variety of colors in there really starts to bring some individuality to this object. Now, as we're previewing and shopping for images on textures.com, I see them. I want you to pay really close attention to some of the lighting, and this is kind of a good global idea. If you examine this guy and compare it to its friend on the right, what would you see and understand to be the big difference between them? Colors are different, but look at the lighting, the values. The one on the left seems like the edges are a little bit darker. There's a big bright spot down there, kind of the lower left-hand corner of the actual image itself. That's something I'm going to stray away from. This one right here, this is a fun one. It's kind of evenly lit. Yeah, it gets a little bit darker on the sides, but I can live with that. It's definitely a step up from this one. Let's look at the third one. I like the third one. This is a good one. So I'm going to download this one real fast. I got to log in, don't I? Okay. Let me log in real fast. I have no idea what my password is. I never log out. I clearly got it wrong. There it is. Okay. So when you're downloading stuff from textures.com, be strategic. Don't download every single thing that you find or that you're interested in. With the free account on textures.com, you only really get 15 credits a day, right? So the high resolution one that I want is 2 credits. So I'm just going to snag that one. Download it real fast. Okay. And that's a good one to start with. Before we go too much further, oh, Devin, you had a question. I want to make sure that gets answered.
When you do the stroke on the first layer with the UV, how do you get yours so bright? Because mine are still kind of dull.
Yeah. So if you go into the actual stroke effect itself, there's this color channel here. So make sure that you've actually clicked on the word stroke, okay? And you'll get all the stroke options. So if you click on the Adobe Color Picker, this is what you're going to see. And you want to put this little circle in the upper right-hand corner. And it's going to make it very bright and extraordinarily saturated with colors. And then this little color slider here is going to influence the hue. It didn't really help much? Okay. What computer number are you, Devin? 23. Let's take a look-see. Okay, show me the layer style properties. Okay, click on the color picker. There you go. Yeah, drag that into the, there it is. Boom shakalaka. That's it. Yeah. Now, let's go, let's see here. A couple things, Devin. You were bad, very, very bad. Okay. Forgot to change the color space of our image before we got started. That's going to have an influence on our perception of color as well. Now, if you make this mistake, it's not the end of the world. Go up to the top of the screen where it says image here, and do mode, do RGB. There you go. Now, did that change your understanding of the color? Maybe a little bit. Go back into your stroke properties. Maybe something in here has gotten changed that I wasn't aware of. The size is 250 pixels. Put that down to 2. What was it on? Go ahead and go back in there. It's on inside too. Yeah, put it on to outside. There we go. All right. Thank you, Devin. Okay. Now, before we get too much further into the process of creating a texture, I think it's really important that we look specifically at our media management, okay? Because the better you are at managing all of your texture data, the easier this is going to be, okay? So I have this folder called Textures, okay? Inside of it, I have the actual texture that I'm creating itself, the Photoshop document. The exported PNG file from this is what's going to go back on the model in Modo. And then here's that assets folder, okay? Now at the moment, just my UV map is the only thing inside that assets folder. But I'm going to do this. Every texture or every image that I download from the web that's going to be a member of this texture, I'm going to place inside that assets folder. That way, if I hand my project file off to another artisan, he or she already has all the root files that I use to help create this asset. They're not going to have to go out and find it again. Everything's in one place. It also makes a lovely, lovely, lovely little briefcase, if you will, of all of your texture information. So if you go over to the lab, you want to continue working over there, you're just taking one file and not a bazillion different things that are sitting on your desktop, okay? The more that you manage your media, believe it or not, the easier this entire process is going to be. Okay. That's a good start. I like that one. I like that one. Okay, so let's jump back over into Modo here. Whoops. Let's jump back over into Photoshop here real fast and start working with that texture. Now this is where kind of my style maybe is a little bit different from yours. Okay, but let's go in and open up that texture. Excuse me, that image that we downloaded from textures.com. There it is, looking pretty good. Awesome. Now I want to put this entire image over into my my texture set here in Photoshop. So you probably just saw I just split it off, that tab. That way I can bring this floating window down into the corner here, which gives me the ability to drag and drop that layer to the background document. A great fast way to place some imagery without having to mess around with that place command. All right, oops. Had the wrong thing selected. There we go. And now what I'm going to try to do here is find a good happy medium. We'll zoom out a little bit. Yeah. I'm going to scale this object up. Command T is going to be responsible. It's going to be your go-to, right? Command T is the free transform command instead of Photoshop, which will allow us very quickly, Command T again, to change the scale of our objects, to stretch it and pull it around. The great thing about working with textures, with textures like this, is that we can transform it however we want, right? If there aren't any visible distortions created by our transformations, then, all is fair, right? All is fair in love and war, okay? We keep cruising. Now this is going to be a really great base for us, and I'm really liking what I've established here so far. But I need to start going in and defining that next layer. So this is my base. The next layer in every sense is going to be the one that I want to use to help create that paint layer. If we start building these things from the background to the foreground, it gives us something that we can chip away to, right? Okay. Let me just get comfortable here. I want to double click on the magnifying glass. That's a great way to go to 100% magnification. If you double click on the hand, it's going to fit the entire document inside of your window. But if you double click on the magnifying glass, it goes to 100% magnification. I try to work at a 1-to-1 pixel ratio as much as I can so I can really directly understand what it is that I'm creating. Okay, so let's start painting now, or start creating that paint layer. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this. Okay, here's a way. Okay, now luckily for us, we have some zones in here. Oops, a little too close. Some zones in here that we want to define as much as we can. Now, I remember from my UV map that this in here, okay, and I'm going to paint on an empty layer so you guys can see what I'm talking about. So all of this jazz, maybe that empty layer be on top. So all of this jazz, okay, this is all one piece in here, okay, and then we have, another color for in here, and then that transitioned all the way, over to there. I want to block out these colors pretty quickly so I can understand, A, if I'm doing it correctly, that they're going on the right places of the model, and if they're working the way I want them to. So let's define some color zones real fast with the tools that we have inside of Photoshop. Now, Photoshop works with, hit the wrong button. Photoshop works very similar to that of Modo in that selections play a large role in everything that we're going to do. Now, I'm going to go in and just very quickly make some selections here. Okay. Now, one of my favorite selection tools, believe it or not, is the polygonal lasso tool. Okay, and you can find the polygonal lasso tool over here inside of your toolbar. So this is your default marquee selection. The marquee selection is going to create rectangular selections like that. Command D to deselect. This one right here, this is the lasso tool. This one's going to allow us to make kind of organic selections, which is great. Okay, my favorite is the polygonal lasso, right? Which allows me to throw down some control points like this, kind of like how the pen tool works inside of Modo. And a simple double click on the interface will close the selection inside of your screen. A great way for us to very quickly block out some colors using some selections, and that's what I'm going to do. Once again, let's go down. I'm all zoomed in here. So I'm going to use my polygonal lasso tool just to block out some basic selections. And I'm going to try to block out as best I can. I'm holding down the space bar, by the way. Yep, there we go. Shift will constrain the polygonal lasso tool to a straight line. Now I'm being a little loose with my selections. I'm selecting outside the border here. Yeah, that's going to be okay until I get down here. Then I might have to come in just to make sure that I'm not getting on the inside of my screws. The coloring book that we're creating allows us to color outside the lines, but we can't accidentally color inside the lines of something else. There we go. I'm on it now. There we go. Wonderful. Handing over to the left now. On my way to the top. Now I'll do a double click to close the selection. Okay. So what I've done here is I've selected, basically the entire sci-fi panel minus all the brackets. That's what these guys up here are, and the bolts themselves. Okay. Now what I'm going to do with this is that I'm going to start making a whole series of masks that will allow me to isolate certain parts of my mesh quickly. In Photoshop, it's all about masks. It really is. Masks are the key to the kingdom, and the more that we can do with masking, the better. Okay. All right, so now what we're going to do And it's hard to see on the projector, and I do apologize. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see the marching ants. Do you guys see the little marching ants that we have here? That's a selection. Now, when we select a big box, because that's kind of what we've done here, when we select a big box, all of the pixels on the inside of that box are the ones that are selected. So if I change a color value, if I go in and start tweaking some stuff, only the pixels inside that box are going to be the ones that are going to be edited and messed with. Okay. So here's what I'm going to do. I don't want to have all of the pixels on the inside of this box selected. I only want to have a few. So I'm going to hold down my Option key and select the boundary of this first color, which is right in here. And this is where the polygonal lasso tool really comes in, because I can get some pretty great accuracy here. Oops. And I just messed up. Excuse me. Okay, here we go. Let's try that again. Let's hold down the Option key. So I want to deselect all of these guys in here. And now I'm trying to be a little bit accurate here. I'm trying to get right on that black line. Here's another great power user trick. Okay, well, I can't do it while the tool is active, but I think it's the caps lock key allows you to turn off the icon for the tool, and you'll just get a crosshair. It's very useful. Okay, so what I've done here is that I selected the outside, and then I did a minus selection on the inside. So now what I've done is just selected that band, okay? That's going to go around the outside of my sci-fi panel. And I want to start outlining and kind of defining some color zones in here, much like I did over in Modo. Now, for us, one of the easy, great ways of defining and kind of blocking out color quickly is to add a solid color layer. And solid colors are the bee's knees. I love them inside of Photoshop. And you can create a solid color layer in this little button down here at the bottom of your layers palette, the yin and yang symbol. If you open it up, at the top of this list is solid color. Now the great thing about this is that it's going to take the area that you selected and mask out that solid color layer based on your selection. If you look very carefully over in my layers palette, you can begin to see that network come to life. So once again, I'm just going to give it a big color here, just so I can understand its role and its influence. Okay? Aha! Awesome. Looking good. Now the great thing about working with masks is that they are editable. If we cruise over into our layers palette here, this is the actual solid color layer. And then see how I got a little chain link, and then this is a mask. A mask is a really, really, really fantastic tool for us to use inside of Photoshop. It allows us to turn off certain pixels based on their masked color value and turn on certain pixels. Now, the great thing about working inside of the image editing and texture painting world is that this black and white convention, because it really is kind of a convention, is standardized around the entire media industry. Anything that's a black and white image can be understood as a mask. It doesn't matter if you're doing compositing in Nuke, texture painting in Substance Painter or here in Photoshop, or even just some simple masking in After Effects or Photoshop. Black and white images are often used as a transparency mask, okay? And it works off of a very simple understanding. The black parts of the mask turn that part of the layer off, right? Black is off, white is on. So anytime I paint white on my layer mask, I'm revealing that part of the image. Let me show you what this looks like. Before I get started, just closely notice that I have my mask selected, not the solid color. Okay? Now, what denotes the selection of these two assets on this layer? Yeah, the little corner brackets here. So now I got the mask selected. And since I got the mask selected, I can simply go over and activate my brush tool. Now, check it out. I'm painting with white down here. Okay? Let's just make sure it's white. So if I paint with white, I'm going to be revealing that part of the image. I want to make my brush bigger by using the open brackets key. So check it out. Now I'm painting white on the mask itself. I'm not adding red. Red was flooded into every pixel on this layer. The mask is turning those pixels on or off. And that's how it works in my brain. I really like that idea. Black is off, white is on. Whenever I paint with black, that part of the layer is being deactivated. It's not being deleted, it's just being made transparent. The inverse, white, is on. This is non-destructive photo editing. Okay? We never want to delete a pixel, because once we delete that pixel, can we get it back? Nope. No. Once we hit that delete key, it is gone, man. Gone, gone, gone forever. Okay? So the best way to work, especially in this non-destructive world, is with masks, because now I can turn off pixels without having to delete them. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Instead of painting with white, as I'm doing here, what if I go over into my color picker and simply load in black? Okay. FYI, here's a great power user shortcut. When working with masks, it automatically loads in black and white into the foreground and background color switcher. Okay. If you hit the X key, it switches back and forth between them. That's a good little trick. Okay. So now I'm painting with black, because maybe I don't want all that stuff on the inside. So instead of deleting it, I'll just turn its visibility off. So black equals off, white equals on. But what if I was to paint with like 50% gray on my mask? You got it. I get 50% transparency. So every percentage of transparency is tied to a percentage of gray. So instead of working with pure black, what if I went in and I put my color picker to 50% gray, and you can see that here in the percentage brightness value inside the color picker. Now watch what happens when I begin to paint inside of my mask. It's kind of this weird ghosted. If you look very carefully at the wireframes of my UVs underneath, I can still see them, right? Because now it's transparent, or the mask is transparent in that area. If I was to once again just turn it to on, see how it blocks the UVs underneath? Okay. Now this is really great for us because we now can begin to fade out certain color channels. We can start to feather them as they go from one value into the next. And this is really great, especially for us in the painting world. Okay. Because often we're going to want to start with a soft, kind of semi-transparent a version of a color, and then have a core that's very, very opaque. You'll see this in play here in a minute when I start painting in some details. All right, so let me just change my colors back to black and white. I'm just going to turn all this monkey business off. All right. Now that we have a little bit more of an understanding of, wonderful. Coolio. Now that we have a little bit more of an understanding of how we can work with masks, let's make maybe one or two more, okay? I know that I needed to have, or I would like to have, if we go back over into Modo, let's check it out real fast. So this section, this is why having Modo open in the background is handy. So this is going to be another color. So if we look carefully here, so I got to have a mask starting right there. Okay, no problem. Let's go back over into Photoshop, and we can start doing that pretty quickly. And this is where having that polygonal lasso tool really comes in handy, because the wireframes are going to allow us to make some real intelligent little clicks here. This goes pretty fast, actually. And luckily, we only have to do this once, okay? I'm not going to click on every single edge inside this zone. I'm just trying to define the extents of this with a mask. So I want to be able to control where I'm painting. It's another one of those things that if you get real good at it, there we go, it gets easy real fast, okay? All right, so there it is. There's the next color. Let's create a new solid with that mask in mind. There we go. All right. Now, if we go back into Moto here, yeah, where's that color going to end? This is why having Moto open in the background. So it's the 1, 2, what is it? 1, 2, so it's the 4th row. Then all this starts. You know what may be easiest? Okay. Yeah. What may be easiest and fastest to get us to that end result is just to flood a much larger area. Really, if you think about it. Got to add sound effects, by the way. Life is so much better with sound effects. Okay, rock and roll. Yeah, there we go. Starts getting weird, then it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then it's the mask. Okay, got it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's the mask. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You certainly could. All right, here we go. One more mask, or one more solid color. Wonderful. We're starting to get there. We're starting to get there. Starting to see this kind of unfold in front of us, which is really kind of nice. Okay. Now, before we go any further, let's just take this back over into Moto real fast and place it back on the model to see if these are kind of working. And actually, before we do that, let's do this. Let's go in and start making some really great connections with some colors. I think I want to have this outside bit be red, but that's just the wrong color red. Maybe a dark red. Then maybe the accent color on the inside. See, red and green do go well together. Let's turn off our wireframes. Yep. It's kind of Christmassy, so let's make it how about a fun shade of orange? It's the cool thing about working at this inside this system is that I can just do this very quickly. A little too purpley. I really don't like that. It's a brown. It's kind of ugly. So now I'm art directing at this point, right? Just trying to figure out what my colors are going to be on the actual model itself. Just experimenting, playing around, seeing what I get. Sometimes you never know what's going to pop out until you start trying a couple different things. What if we make the core a little bit more orangey? Yeah, let's try that, see what that looks like. Okay, that's a good series of colors. I like the direction that we're going in here. Let's save this file as a PNG and put it back on my model in Moto and see what it looks like. I always like to test this entire system before I go too much further. I've only devoted, if I wasn't teaching, this is the first 10 minutes of my work here in Photoshop. And it's good to really understand if the foundation that we're creating here in Photoshop is going to work back on the model in Modo, because that's the most important part. I'm saving it as a PNG. Let's jump back over into Modo real fast and place this image on the actual model itself, and we'll see what we're going to get. Now, these are all just temporary placeholder materials. I can junk these real fast. Right-click, delete, and now let's throw everything in the entire map. Let's just make a new material called test. There we go. Add the image map, just like we would on any other image map. Now it's inside Sci-Fi panel, textures. There's the referenced PNG file. Yeah, rock and roll. Now we're starting to get a really good understanding of what this is going to look like. Okay, I think I may even go in and recycle that lovely red color that I'm using on the outside for all the brackets too. Okay, that'll be kind of fun. That'll make life a whole lot easier and start to maybe make this a little bit more consistent between each of the elements. Okay, so all of this jazz up in here, these are the brackets. So I want to make one fast, gigantic selection real fast. And this is the cool thing about working inside of Photoshop, or especially the UV painting, texture painting, is that I can extend, outside the lines a little bit. I can color outside the lines. That's fine. I'll transform this selection. Go. Let's create a new solid color just based on that. And I'm going to recycle that color. And this is the cool part. Hit OK. And there we go. Oops. I wanted to pick that one. Coolio. I like it. Now I also I'm going to go back to working on the mask that's going to be responsible for doing the brackets and extend it a little bit. This first bit was using it to just very quickly make sure, oops, yeah, I'm good. Select transform selection. It's a great power user trick. Allows you to very quickly, and then I'm going to paint with white. I'm actually going to fill my selection with white. Oops, not content aware. I want white, so the red shows up there too. Wonderful. Okay, let's turn off my UVs, do another file, save as, see what that looks like back on the model in Modo. I won't get it. You just have to replace it, which is awesome. And then every time you replace your file, Modo is going to pop up and say, hey, something's changed your original asset. Do you want me to reload it? Yep. Awesome sauce, looking pretty good. I'm going to do it one more time just to block out the colors of all of my little bolts here. Select transform selection. There we go. I think I need to make it a little bit wider. Yeah, snap is driving me crazy. I'm going to turn off my snap. There we go. Awesome. Now for the bolts, I wanted the bolts to be a separate color. And I think I originally prototyped like a nice dark gray. Now nothing in our world is going to be black, okay? So if you want to kind of block out a dark metallic color, or just dark colors in general, never, ever use black, okay? Use a dark gray, okay? We always want to have some sort of value that we can push into the shadow realms, okay? If we have pixels on our texture that are black, we have nothing to define a shadow in the game engine, right? Or just in in Modo 2. So everything needs to be dark gray so that we can create pools of shadows realistically on the object back in Modo. All right. I'm going to save my Photoshop document and then also save out another PNG just to very quickly prototype what this is going to look like back on the model in Modo. Let's reload it. Yep, I'm liking that. I can even make that a little bit darker. This is the cool thing about working with these colors, these solid colors, is I don't have to go back in and repaint anything. The color's being driven by the solid color layer, not a specified stroke. Yeah, there it is. I'm happy camper about that. That's some good stuff right there. Me likey very much. Okay, So now we need to go in and start adding a little bit of detail in here. We need to start chipping away at some of the stuff that we've created. And this is where your texture set comes to life to a certain degree. It looks like I missed it a little bit. I need to go back in and do some work on that inside on this one. Let's turn my UVs back on. Oops, excuse me. I always do that. I always use the Moto keyboard shortcuts the first time I jump back into Photoshop. Always do that. It drives me crazy. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. Just using my polygonal lasso tool, just very quickly make some selections. I need to extend that row just by one little bit. I'm going to start off by just very quickly doing a garbage selection inside of the field that I'm going to be working with, or that's already been painted white on that layer's image mask. There we go. And now, holding down the the Option key, I'll do a minus selection on the insides, and now I'm going to be a little bit more accurate to make sure that I'm just sitting right there on my UVs. And then I'm going to fill this selection with white. It's going to extend that red color one row. There we go. So with that mask selected in my layers palette, I'm going to go Edit, Fill, and I want to fill it with white. You can see Command D to deselect. Yep, looking good. All right, now, so this next bit is going to allow us to go in and start painting some really great texture detail. And I want to be able to use some of the texture information that's found in the underlying layer itself. So imagine we're kind of projecting ourselves into the foreground a little bit here. Okay, it's 10,000 years in the future. The environment has begun to influence this shape a little bit. Okay, we need to start taking away some of this paint layer information. Well, there's a lot of ways that we can do this. Okay, since I have a mask already selected and created over here, we're actually going to paint on the mask itself. A good practice, since we've created our kind of big masks. Okay, these are the master masks, these guys over here, is to save them. So just in case we need to go back in and reutilize them in their clean, kind of undisturbed state, we can, okay? And this is a good practice to get into, because these are our master masks that define these big areas of colors. I want to keep them just in case, okay? So check it out. If you go over into the channels section, right here, the channel section, here's that mask, okay? Now the reason it's showing up here is because I have that layer selected. If I were to select a different layer, like this guy, see how it loads it in there? Okay? Now I want to save these. Let's start at the bottom. I want to save that one. And it's really just this easy. It's pretty cool. I'm going to select it, and I want to drag it down onto the Create New Layer button at the bottom of the Layers palette, the little document sign, the page with the corner flipped up. And now that's going to save that mask. Let's give it a good name. I'm going to call this Outside Rim. There we go. Now, no matter what layer I have selected, so if I grab like this inside one, now it's going to show me the inside mask, but I have that outside rim mask permanently saved as an alpha channel, as a transparency or selection channel right here in our channels tab. It's a great, great practice to get into. All right, so I got that one. Let's make a copy of this inside one. Let's just call this inside. Oops, I can't spell or see inside. Let's just call it inside. This is going to be circle, inside circle. Okay. These are the brackets. This is the master mask for the brackets. Of course, these are the bolts. Okay, so now I've permanently saved all of my masks as separate alpha and transparency channels in my channels tab. That's going to be very, very helpful going forward in the future. All right, so let's start dirtying up our mask a little bit and begin to chip away some of this paint. Because right now it just looks like a kind of a metal layer sitting on top of a solid color, right? And I want to start integrating these things back together. Now, because we've already defined this with masks, check this out. This is actually very, very cool, by the way. I love, love, love this, okay? What I'm going to do is that I'm going to select the mask on this red layer here, okay? Use some of the pixels, okay, some of the texture information of the layer underneath it, the metal layer, to help drive this next action. The less I have to paint, the better, and it allows me to work through this really fast, too. Because I don't want to have to go in and hand paint every single little detail in here. That's a waste of our time, okay? As texture artists, especially in the game world, we have to be very, very aware of how much time we're spending on each asset itself. Okay, because you could be assigned 300 different objects that you have to model, texture, and UV in a month, okay? Which kind of translates into you get a day to do this, okay? We need to get to the end result quickly and efficiently. And if we're smart about it, create it in a way that's highly editable without having to go in and do a tremendous amount of additional painting on top of what's already been done. All right, so here's the trick. I want to use all the lovely texture information on the metal layer below it to help me drive what we see in this red field. And just to, now it's buried, what we're looking for here is the paint bucket tool. The paint bucket tool seemingly is useless for a lot of folks, right? Because what does the paint bucket tool do? It fills in an entire section, right? It floods an entire layer. But when we pair it with our masking tools, believe it or not, it gets very, very interesting. Very interesting, okay? Now, at the moment, what we're doing is that we're masking an entire layer, okay? And I got a little ahead of myself because I got excited. Because I love doing this. This is where things start to come to life. Right now, if you take a look at it, here's our solid color layer. Now, it's being masked out by this thing, okay? I want to have a separate mask on this, okay? What I'm going to do as an alternative to make it a little bit easier, a little bit faster, is create a folder, okay? Let's just call this outside. Okay? Now what I want to have is that I want to have anything that goes inside this folder be masked out by this right here. And here's the trick. It's pretty cool. If you hold down the Command key, okay, and you click on a layer mask like this, can you guys see how the icon changes? The little hand with the marching ant symbol. It's going to select that mask. And you can see the selections in my document itself. And what I want to do is that I want to apply that selection as a mask on the folder. We can do that by clicking on this button. It's the one that's sandwiched between the FX symbol and the yin and the yang symbol down here at the bottom of our layers palette. Bloop. Okay? So now we have a folder that's called outside. It's being masked out by this image. And I want to put this inside that folder. And I'm going to fill this entire mask on the solid color with black. Oops, I missed it. Let's put it black. Wonderful. Okay. Now that's actually a good thing. Okay. This is what we're after. We're still going to get that masking effect because the contents of a folder are always going to adopt the parent's mask. Okay. Let me prove that to you beyond any reasonable doubt. If I was to throw a new image, a new layer inside of that folder outside, okay, I'll just grab my brush tool here real fast. Check it out. See how it's only painting inside of there, which is pretty great. Anything that goes inside that folder is going to get masked out by the mask associated with the folder, which makes it very, very easy and fast to construct our textures. Okay? So what I'm going to do now, and this is where it gets really fun, is that I'm going to have my solid color layer selected, and more importantly, I want to have its mask. Okay? And this is where the paint bucket tool comes in. It's pretty fun. Now, I want to expose certain parts. So I want to paint with white instead of black. And if I was just to click, that's what we'd get. Boring, dull. That's not what we're after at all, right? We're kind of right back to square one. If I hit undo, and then hit the magic button, all layers, okay? Now it's going to take the value of any pixel that I click on and use that value, so that grayscale value, to drive the paint bucket tool. Okay. So now all that lovely kind of chipping, that paint chipping, is coming from the underlying layer, that metal texture that I placed underneath it. Now, one other kind of option to employ with the paint bucket tool is this tolerance, because maybe you flooded in too much. Okay, this tolerance value. If you don't like it, maybe you clicked on something, you're like, oh, that's not what I want. Just change your color to black, change your tolerance. You can start all over again. Oops. There we go. Awesome. It's pretty great. I like that. In a couple mouse clicks, I've been able to kind of rough up the entire image based off of the underlying texture, not by my own artistic capabilities, which is pretty neat. All right. And we're getting some really great freebie stuff in here, too. If you look at what's going on, you wouldn't have been able to paint that realistically. Yeah, that's some good stuff. All right. So we're marching closer and closer and closer towards something that's pretty realistic, or that's beginning to look a little bit more realistic. If this was actual paint, okay? So if you took a piece of metal, you spray painted it, or you painted it and somehow, there's going to be paint has thickness to it. There's a dimension, okay? So let's do this. Let's create a kind of the illusion of maybe that thickness, that dimension in the actual texture itself. I want to put a small little outline on each one of these paint flakes that's maybe 2 or 3 pixels wide, okay? Now, those paint flakes, since they were being driven by a mask, are selectable, okay? Check it out. If we return to our layers palette here, this is the mask that's determining where all the red goes. It's selectable, so I can hold down the Command key, click on it, and now look what's been selected. Yeah, all that stuff. That's awesome. That's looking really, really good. Me like you very much, okay? And let's do this. Let's make another layer. Now, if you already have a selection in tow, when you create a solid color layer, it's going to use that selection to determine where all this jazz is going to go. And let's pick maybe like a really dark orange. Okay, let's put it underneath. Okay, now it's still kind of matching everything just absolutely perfectly. So what we could do here, perhaps, is extend the mask ever so slightly. Okay, so I selected the mask that's responsible for that orange color down here in my layers palette, and I'm going to grow it. Oops, not grow. That's the wrong one. Select, modify. I want to expand it. Excuse me. Now you're going to get this little pop-over that says expand it by how many, right? Well, let's just do 1 pixel. Yeah, that's pretty good. And now what we need to do is we need to fill, I'm on the wrong thing, got to click the mask, edit, fill that selection back with white. Bloop. Cool. And now we have these little 1 pixel outlines to all of our paint flakes, which is pretty neat. I'm not too happy with the color, and this is where it gets to be pretty fun. I don't have to repaint anything. Maybe I want to highlight around it or make it really dark. That's cool too. Sometimes going dark is probably the wrong way. Now we can do a little bit of art direction. Yeah, that's looking pretty great. Now it's starting to come to life just a little bit. Let's do a couple more things in here that we can do to start kind of beating this up a little bit, because our paint still looks extraordinarily uniform. I mean, look at that red. There isn't a whole lot of interior detail on the red. We flaked it off in certain areas, but there should be some scratches showing up on the top of the paint. Okay, so maybe some scuff marks, some other information that we could use to help kind of describe how that paint's been influenced by its environment. Let's return to textures.com real fast and look at some other options. Now, let's see if I can find a winner here. I'm shopping for a texture that we can use. That one is pretty fantastic. Ooh, there's some good stuff in here. Choices, choices, choices. The way we set this up allows us to swap these textures pretty quickly and understand pretty directly how all this looks. Now, I like this one because there's some really great scratches in there. Let's download that one real fast. Of course, be good stewards of our scene. Don't need Moto. Let's put it inside of our asset folder before we get any further. Okay? That way Photoshop is opening it from the correct location. We're saving it as we go. That one. Yeah, that might be fun. Let's just see what that looks like if we bring that one in. Now, I'm going to place this on top of everything. It's getting masked out immediately by its parent. So I'll take it out just so I can understand pretty quickly what I'm working with here. There we go. That looks pretty good. Let's put that back inside the folder so it gets masked out. But I don't want, I want it on top, but man, that's not, all my paint information is now gone. So what I'm going to do now is employ some blending options, some blend modes, to begin to take this color information that we found in all of our scratches here and start having it influence the red. Okay? Blend modes are a really fantastic way for us to combine layers. Well, they're really not combining them. We're taking color and values from this layer and using it to affect the transparency of the layers below it. You can find your blend modes right here. This is your blend mode pulled on layer. There's a whole bunch of them. It's kind of overwhelming what this does, okay? But if you look very carefully, they're categorized. Each of these dark lines in the list represent a different category of blend modes. And each of these blend modes is going to do something, or each of these categories is going to do something a little bit different from the next, okay? So as you'd imagine, if we were to multiply or darken, hopefully Photoshop is not moments from crashing. Okay, good. So if we did multiply, look very, very carefully now, and now it's starting to come to life a little bit. When we multiply, what we're ultimately doing here is that we're taking out all of the pixels that are 50% gray to 100% gray, so basically middle gray to pure white, and we're making them transparent, and we're leaving all the dark ones in there, okay? Which is why everything got real dark real fast, okay? So the first category is going to darken your layer a little bit, which is not a bad thing, okay? But so these are going to generally kind of darken stuff. This is the opposite. When we screen something, we keep all the lighter pixels, and all the darker pixels on that layer are made transparent. So now it's much brighter, okay? And you can experiment around these. All these other options are just different rules within inside that system. I usually experiment. It's fun, it's cool. Now, if you want to start to physically mix colors and blend them together, that's what this section in here does. And overlay is a good one. I like overlay, because now we're getting some dark bits in there, some light bits. And it's beginning to look like our paint layer is starting to get scratched to beat up and stuff. So now this is really kind of up to you to figure out how you want your texture to look, okay? One other thing that's important to note is that sometimes we can add these blend modes in here and the effect is just a little too heavy-handed. Well, there's nothing that says that you can't go in, and note that I have that layer 3 selected. There's nothing to say that you can't go in and reduce the opacity of that layer, which is going to start to tone down that effect over the cross of your texture. Yeah, so now it's still getting beat up, but it's just ever so slightly. We have a problem, though, and I'm going to put my opacity back to 100% just to illustrate this problem. Let's go right there, okay? I want you to look very carefully, right where my mouse cursor is circling. Look at this big paint flake right here. I have texture detail that's coming from this top guy inside of that area, which isn't what I want. I only want to see the details from layer 3 on the red. I don't want to see it in the holes. So how could I solve this problem pretty quickly? Say again? Load the channel, and you're right, copy the mask, right? Copy the mask that's being used to create all the paint flakes, which is this guy, okay? And load that as a layer mask for the topmost guy. So I'm going to hold down the Command key, select that mask. You can see what we're getting here, rock and roll. Click on the layer mask button, and now I'm only getting the paint flakes, or excuse me, that top layer of detail on the paint, not in the area that's been masked out. Cool, huh? Pretty neat. I like you very much. Okay. Now we're getting closer and closer and closer to something that's looking pretty compelling. I'm liking the way this is looking. And now naturally we have a tremendous amount of work left in front of us to get this going where we want to go. Let's just do a file save as real fast and put that PNG back on the model in Modo and see, or look at the model or the texture back on the model in Modo to see what it looks like. Now is a good time just to kind of starting to come to life a little bit. Okay, starting to look a little bit weathered and a little bit more detailed. Okay. Now, at times, we're going to need to go in and start to paint in some localized detail to start integrating all these bits and pieces back together again. Okay? A great example of this would be in the corners here. This looks like it's been just kind of wallpapered together. And I want to have some really cool information that I can use in here quickly to kind of integrate this. Maybe some dirt and grime accumulation happens there in the corners. So the paint bucket tool is a great way to quickly use the existing materials or the existing pixel information from other layers to influence a mask. But from time to time, you're going to have to go in and do some brushing. Okay? And let me show you the brush system real fast, because the brush system inside of Photoshop is fantastic. Okay? It's one of the reasons we choose to paint things in Photoshop is because of this really great brush system. Now, the brush system, and let me just get comfortable here, the one thing that I didn't do was create a folder for the background, and that's okay. I think I can do it pretty quickly with just managing my layers palette. What I want to do is paint some organic detail right at the edges in here. Okay. Now, the brush system inside of Photoshop allows us to do this pretty quickly. If you hit the B key on your keyboard, of course, naturally you can go in and start brushing some information down, okay? But you're almost always going to get something that's like that, which doesn't look too hot, right? Nothing's ever like that. Nothing's, you can go in and try to make it look organic with a soft brush, but it's always going to look like garbage, okay? So what we want to do here is start extending our brush system with some organic-looking brushes, and they're pretty easy to load in. Let's open up our brush preset palette. Okay, I want to tear this entire thing off just to make it a little bit bigger. There we go. So we have a whole bunch of brush presets that come with Photoshop that allow us to kind of paint with a grungy texture versus these really soft things in here. And yeah, you can paint with maple leaves if you wanted, right? Click on the brush preset. Now you're painting with maple leaves instead of instead of these big soft or somewhat hard brushes like that. Now there are some really interesting grungy brushes that come with Photoshop. Okay, that's interesting, kind of a charcoaly effect. However, there are a lot of resources on the web that will help you find some really good grunge brushes. What's this one do? Yeah, that's interesting. Sometimes I just like to try before I buy. What's this one look like? Yeah, that's interesting. Kind of like smeared oil. That's neat. That's interesting. We can load more brush presets in. Oops. By clicking on, I double-clicked on accident. If you click on this little icon, the little lines in the upper right-hand corner of the palette, here are all the brushes that come with Photoshop. Experiment, explore. There's some good stuff in here. There really is. Like, let's look at thick, heavy brushes. Okay, and it says replace current brushes with the brushes from the thick, heavy brushes. Yeah, okay. So here are the thick, heavy brushes. Sometimes these brushes are really meant to be stamped down rather than dragged. What's this one give us? It's cool. At least it's a little bit more compelling information. I like that. But check it out. If you were to go, hold on a sec. I don't want to name a brush. If you were to go out to the good old Googs here, okay, and do Photoshop grunge brushes, you're going to find about 10,000 good ones. Okay. There are bazillions of them out there. Okay. And what's cool about this is they're all images that have been transformed into a brush. My automatic download will start in approximately 1 second. There we go. And what you're going to get, let's show this in the Finder. Unload the zip file real fast. What you're going to get is an ABR file. Anyone want to take a guess at what .abr means? Adobe Brush, you got it, right? So we're going to load this file into Photoshop. It's really easy. This is now an asset, so I'm going to actually move that into my assets folder. Okay. Go back over into Photoshop. And if you once again return to these lines in the upper right-hand corner, you can see that we have load brushes right down there. We'll navigate to where we saved that brush file on our computer, which for me is on my desktop. There we go. Aha! Here they all are, which is pretty great. What's this one? That one's a huge one. Cool. Very cool. There's some good stuff in there. And let's just keep going for... What's this one? Let's make it a little bit bigger. Or excuse me, a little bit smaller. Oh, that's good. That's a good start. Okay? Because now we can have some fun with this. Now I'm going to paint with all this texture information on a new solid color. Okay, I'll make a new solid color. I paint with solid colors almost exclusively because they allow me to non-destructively make a pretty big sweeping change. I almost always, out of habit, what's going on here? It is masked. I can't select my mask. Move something. It seems like there's a pop-up window that's waiting to confirm something. Here, we'll do this. I refuse to let that stop me, so I'll just make another one. Okay. Why am I not able to select my mask? No mask selected. Yes, absolutely. I could. Yeah, that's weird. I'm not able to select my mask. What? Oh, I don't want my quick mask on. Thank you. I didn't realize I must have hit the quick mask button. Thank you. So what Kevin pointed out just now is that I must have accidentally bumped and turned on the quick mask system, which was stopping me from selecting the mask itself. Okay, with that in mind, let's turn off the influence of my mask by flooding it with black. I always find it is a lot easier to understand what I'm doing, especially when I'm painting when everything is off. Okay. Now I want to paint with white. Let's zoom in a little bit here. Paint with white, brush. And now what I'm doing in here, very quickly go in. Now this brush doesn't work really well when you left click and drag. You can see how it's kind of repeating the pattern. That's okay, because let me show you something. I'm going to erase all this. The brushing system inside of Photoshop is very, very strong. One of the things that allows us to do pretty quickly, let's go back into it. There we go. If we go into the brush section here, we have a whole bunch of shape dynamics, which is a lot of fun. The first thing that I'm going to do is change my spacing. That way, every time I left click and drag over my canvas, the computer is going to stamp out that pattern a little bit more separated, and you can experiment around with that. Another thing that I like to do is change the shape dynamics. Let's turn on a little bit of size jitter, angle jitter for sure. There we go. Now it's just becoming a little bit more organic, which is what I want. You can scatter them a little bit. Count. That way sometimes when I left click and drag, it'll be really tight, and other times it won't. So it's just a really great way for us to very quickly go in and get something that's working. Excuse me. All right, we'll start painting a little bit. I'm going to paint with white again. Cool. A little bit more organic now. I like it. Just very quickly go in, start putting some detail. And if I mess up, that's okay, because I'm just painting with black and white. Yeah, looks okay, right? Because you know what's kind of a really cool idea from time to time is to go in and throw down a base, okay? And then to go back into your brush preset palette, and I'm closing mine on accident. Maybe experiment with a different brush. It's a little too big. And flip your color back to black and just kind of chop away at it a little bit, right? That's kind of neat. Yeah, that's good. If you don't like the color, that's okay, because the color isn't driven by the mask, right? The color of all this detail is being done by this solid color. So if I want to go in and change my mind after the fact, I absolutely can, right? Or if your art director comes in and says, Pat, instead of having it be black, I really want it to be a dark, 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 dark red, right? Or maybe like a dark, 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 dark green to kind of start to suggest perhaps like there's some mossy, mossy kind of elements, organic something in there, right? That's pretty cool. It's not tied to a brush stroke. The color is non-destructive as well. Cool, huh? Maybe I can layer. Let's add another layer in. Oops, not that layer. Let's add another solid color into the mix. Okay. Doesn't matter initially what the color is. And let's flip it. Command I will also flip your mask back to off. And now let's grab another brush. Oops. What's this one look like? Well, that's kind of fun. Let's just go in and add. I'm painting with black. I meant to paint with white. Excuse me. Happens when you're working on a small screen. Now what I'm going to do here, I'm just painting some extra interior detail in some specific areas. And then I'm going to go ahead and change its color after the fact. And I'm trying to put this extra detail in the areas that are already kind of naturally dark. Okay? So I want to build up some color in here, right? Because color fades and changes as it goes from the core all the way to the outside, and I'm intentionally trying not to be perfect here. There we go. And since I did it with red, it's real easy for me to see what's going on. I went a little too crazy in here, so I'll paint with black. Kind of do a little subtractive work. There we go. Paint with white, add some color in. Paint with black, take it out. Okay, and now let's art direct. If this in here is my base, the red can maybe start acting like a highlight. Not red though, I don't want it to be red. So now we have a little bit of value change in there. Okay, can zoom in, check it out, right? See how I have this lighter green layer, okay, and then it goes to dark. There's the light green layer. Then it goes to dark. Okay. Now I've gotten a little bit sloppy. I've gotten very sloppy with my painting, and I'm ruining my illusion. I have some of my details going into my chips. This is why we saved some of those raw original masks, because now I can very quickly select the outside rim mask, one of my master masks, and I can just go into my layer here. I want to fill that selection with black. With this one, fill black. Now I've turned off all that detail on the inside there. Okay. Looking pretty good. Come on, open up folder. There we go. Cool, huh? Let's do a file, quick save as, and we'll call it a day. See what it looks like back on the model in Moto. Yeah, now we're getting there. I may have went a little too heavy-handed with my colors to prove a point and to illustrate what I'm going with here, but it's this whole idea of layering. Okay? Layering and masking. Layering and masking. And really, masking is the key to the kingdom when it comes to all this stuff. The more we can understand and influence our art with masks, the better it will be, because these are controllable elements and they're very non-destructive. Okay. Now let's take a look real fast what we're doing for our homework this week. Okay. The sci-fi panel is 1, and I really want you to spend a good 90 minutes or so trying to build a good piece of artwork for your texture. Okay. Shouldn't have to UV map everything. Everything is right there waiting for you. Take a look at some of the samples of your predecessors. You can kind of get a good idea of the direction we're going in here. Okay. Take everything that we've talked about today to heart. Okay. And look at how we can artistically recreate a texture mask that gives us some really great, compelling detail. Okay, so that's going to be your lab assignment this week. Now, your homework assignment this week, yeah, Carlos, you got a question? No, just stretching. All right. Your homework assignment this week is a modeling assignment. Okay, as I mentioned at the beginning of the class today, you're going to be making a blacksmith shop. And this is a blacksmith shop that we're going to be living with over the next couple of weeks. This week, I want you to build the model for it. Okay. The next week, we're going to spend all of our time talking about tiling textures, because how we approach texturing a house or a big building is a little bit different. Actually, it's very different from how we'd approach texturing the blacksmith shop sign, a local asset, something of much smaller size and scope. Okay? Because what we don't want to use in the tiling texture workflow, believe it or not, is Photoshop. So our texturing pipeline is going to change. I want you to throw all of your energy into the construction of your house, of a house.
Are we turning the assignment?
No, sign's just for you, but it can and should be an element that you can roll into your blacksmith shop. So you already have a detailed piece that waiting to go. Now, I want you to be creative when it comes with your blacksmith shop. Okay, try to think of a location that would realistically include a blacksmith and include some details like some anvils. You've already made a sword and a shield, right? Okay. You already have a catapult, too, that maybe you can start using to populate your scene. You have some good stuff that you can use to support your blacksmith shop. Yes, sir. Question? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So be creative. It doesn't necessarily have to be your own design, but that's a good place to begin. Okay. This is going to be a project that we're going to be living with over the next couple of weeks. Each one of these, if you look at the next couple assignments, they are milestone projects to a much bigger project. So it's important that we zero in on the geometry pretty quickly and get that rocking and rolling before we go too much further. Okay? You are going to be handing in the completed model itself next week. So in addition to making the model of it, go in and spend some time just making a nice little portfolio render that showcases your model and submit both the LXO and that JPEG to the Dropbox in Canvas. Now I saw a hand. Rob, was it you? Exterior only. You can do the interior if you want, but we're not going to physically go inside. But if you'd like to do the interior, I'm not going to say no. Never going to pull back on doing more. Questions, comments? All right, I'll see you guys next week. You too.